How's it going, everybody? RazingHel here, and today we're going to be taking a bit of a look at Cossacks 3. Now, as you might or might not know, Cossacks 3 is like a sequel to the original Cossacks game, which came out in 2001. It's produced and developed by the same company as well, that being GSC Game World. It seems to be a more and more common trend that a lot of these smaller developers are breaking away from their publishers and choosing to self-publish themselves. Now, I've mentioned before in the last video that I'm still getting over a sickness, a cold, so yeah, my voice is not going to be up to snuff like usual, so don't expect the quality to always be like this. But there are some things that I want to mention about the game, some things I like, some things I don't, and we're just going to go through that in a first impressions style of the game. I don't want anybody to mistake this for a review because I've not played nearly the entire thing. The game is actually quite long. It's a good deal of campaign to get through here. So if you're into a lot of single player action, there will be, a lot of scenarios for you to play through. Now, the game, it actually has Steam integrated multiplayer, even though you're going to need an account with the game company. GSC Game World. Yeah, I'm not sure why they decided to go that way, but this, in my opinion, is like a positive because the other Cossacks games, one of the biggest drawbacks they have is, for example, the first one does not support Steam multiplayer at all. I think the second one does, Back to War, but the problem is both of those games can be tricky to run. They're not the newest anymore, and the changes in hardware and even software has made it in recent years. I know, especially after 7, players have complained about compatibility problems running those games, and I've had difficulties as well. So I think one of the biggest selling points of Cossacks 3 at the moment is simply an update for players who liked the older games. This is like the working version of the game going forward. The GSC Game World will be, I can't remember that game. I can't remember that name. It is, it's so remarkably mundane. But this will be the game that'll be being updated going forward. It has full Steam support, obviously, achievements, cards. The point being, this game, Cossacks 3, is going to be the Cossacks game that you play from now on. So, for players who are not familiar with Cossacks 3, what is it? I probably should have got to this earlier, actually. It's a real-time strategy game that is sort of like a cross between Total War and Age of Empires. You build buildings, and I'm just going to jump into a random map, I think. That's an awful progress bar. It does not look pretty at all. So, probably got a little bit ahead of myself. We should first cover what this game is. Cossacks 3 is a real-time strategy game, much along the lines of Age of Empires 3, with a little bit of Total War thrown into the mix. So you start off building your town, for example. You were building Town Hall. You can adjust the game speeds, so I probably want the game speed to go very fast just during this demonstration. So anyway, here's the deal. You build buildings. Here you need a farm. You set up your town, and then as your workers are collecting resources, then you start building armies, and you fight with those. So it's pretty straightforward. It's more like Age of Empires, I would say. I think Age of Empires is like a common reference point that most people understand. Now, I am not very familiar with this game. I'm just going to be straightforward about that. I probably should have mentioned it earlier once again, but the problem being is that there is a lot of nuance to this game, and there is not really an easy way to pick it up. I'd say one of my biggest complaints about the game currently is that it is simply not easy to pick up for a beginner. You have to go through a lot of tutorials, and even then, just information that should be laid bare, you'd think, at the very beginning is not easily available. So, for example, if I am wondering about a topic, I have to actually go into the tutorial or go outside the game to read about it, because there's no help inside the game here. There's no way I can just look something up. And part of the problem with that, is this the Barracks? Yeah. Part of the problem with that is there are a lot of different units and I'm not even sure, technologies maybe even for different civilizations. It's asymmetrical in terms of gameplay. You're not going to have all of these civilizations building the same stuff. And there are about a dozen civilizations. Don't quote me on that. Somewhere in the realm of that. So what does that mean? Well, what are the differences between civilizations? It's not readily apparent. And that's an issue for me because there's no way to look it up. If you're going to have a game with a lot of nuanced subtleties between the different civilizations in it, you should at least make it easy for players to look that kind of information up as the need arises. So not a big fan of that. Definitely could have included more information. I know the developer publisher is, I think it's based in Eastern Europe. So, they might not, how can we set the, okay, we just set the rally point like that. Are these peasants not working? No, they're okay. They're very low on food. So this is a rather interesting point, and it will allow me to segue into it perfectly. Your units cost a running amount of food all the time. They're going to be constantly consuming food. It's not like Age of Empires specifically where you just pay a food cost one time, and then all of a sudden you're just your workers essentially live free after that. Like you pay 50 meat. I think that was the general icon used for food in Age of Empires. You don't pay the cost one time. It's an ongoing cost. So your peasants will be needing food. Your military units will be needing, let's see, your iron, coal, and what is, I think, gold for mercenary units especially, and like gunpowder units. They need coal, I think, to fire. So it's significantly different in that sense because you're not going to be able to maintain a standing army if you do not have the economy to back it up. One of the things that I really don't think the sequel did too well is update the game. It does not feel like a game that would have been it feels like a game that could have been released in 2006. I mean, this is like Age of Empires 3 stuff. The menu is definitely a little bit newer, but it still lacks a lot of the customization that newer game menus that are coming out with have. But at the same time, there are not a whole lot of strategy games being released all the time. And I'm not paying much attention to what's going on here. Could build some pikemen. Just to give you an idea, because we really should, I want to demonstrate one of the most unique aspects to the game. We don't need 5 drummers, but we need an officer. And one of the biggest distinctions, aside from the ongoing resource costs for units, is actually the formation of armies in this game. So while obviously you still have to click on peasants to build buildings, which that didn't happen, I think menu more like Stronghold would suit it better, where we can just plan buildings and then have peasants go over and work on them. The environment itself, I'm saying, it's not very alive. If we zoom in here and look at these trees, they're all stagnant. None of them are animated at all. So it's like, why? The textures kind of bland, to be honest. It's just not that graphically nice to look at. But then again, a lot of people who are playing real-time strategy games are not looking for that in a real-time strategy game anyway. So is it really that big of an issue? I'm not sure. That's just rather disappointing that, a real-time strategy game comes out that is based in this sort of medieval time. That's not medieval per se. It's more like Renaissance. But based in this time frame, because there's so many real-time strategy games that come out now that seem to be based in a future tense or a space theme. Not so many of these medieval ones, and I'm personally a fan of the medieval stuff. And Cossacks 3 was sort of set to change that. It was a game I was looking forward to for the last 6 months or so. And it just does not set the bar much higher. When I look at this game and then I look at Age of Empires 3, for example, I do not think the game looks like it has progressed in terms of graphical resolution, just overall quality like that. If you look at Total War games, for example, the amount of detail that they put into a lot of their units, a lot of the formations, a lot of the unit animations, It's actually pretty amazing. I mean, their games are essentially 30 gigabyte installations now, whereas Cossacks 3 is about 1.3 gigabytes, which, believe it or not, is about where the game sat at back in the day when the Cossacks 2 came out. I believe that was about the same size. So, you know, why? Is it that they couldn't do it, or is it that they just knew that this game was this game was targeted at a very niche audience, and they didn't actually need to be concerned about trying to get like more mainstream attention behind it? Like, they knew that they had a built-in audience here, and they went strictly for that. And personally, I think that is pretty much what did happen, because we have a Musketeer here. Am I building Musketeers? Yeah, I built a few Musketeers. Okay. I think that is pretty much what happened, though, because the game is pretty much a copy of the first game, except it's been updated into three-dimensional space, and it now has, you know, it's got support from the developers again, because the first games were not doing that anymore. Oh man, I am just falling so far behind in doing anything of importance in this game right now. Wow, not been thinking about what I'm doing here. And that is like one of the biggest downsides to strategy games. It's very difficult to play competently at all and say anything insightful about the gameplay while you're doing it. And since I'm not familiar with the game, how is our house capacity? Oh, house capacity is pretty fair. Yeah, it's just difficult to do both at the same time. And I'm not really playing for serious here. I'm just trying to show off a couple of things. So let's get these guys over here, and I'm going to show you the formations. Probably one of the more distinctive aspects of the Cossacks series, and that's carried over into 3 as well. So right now, we need to select our officer, and once we have an officer and a drummer, we can tell our units to assume different formations. So we're going to do a column formation here, and the pikemen will rearrange into that formation. Now, they do seem to have a little bit of unit collision, or like unit collision detection, which is nice. I think that, you know, like right now it's nothing like Total War. Let's just put it that way. It's like it tries to be a cross between Age of Empires and Total War, but it's not, and it does neither particularly well. But it's at the same time a bit understandable, because it is by a studio that likely has a lot less funding than Creative Assembly does, or Microsoft, you know, which was pretty much the studio behind Age of Empires. So, you know, you make some compromises there. And like, really, this is a very interesting thing to me. You can't bring up this game menu by pressing escape. You have to press backspace. No, apparently the keyboard commands are really finicky in this game. I don't understand them. Like, why did they keep, you know, the directional keys to pan the map around when I'd rather use WASD? How come I can't control it? Why can't I remap it to that? You can't. Not very many keyboard options here. And in a game that comes out nowadays, it's like keyboard options, you probably should make those available, like, so players can swap them around as they like. It's really convenient if you do that. But I think I've covered a lot of what I have to say about the game. Now, one of the biggest draws to the game, I think originally, was the fact that you had these very big battles. And that's not going to be so much the case anymore, because games like Total War have pretty much dwarfed Cossacks in terms of the size of the battles, but you can still get some pretty big battles going on. And I'm not doing the game justice here by showing the size of the army that I have. Obviously, there are much bigger regiments that you can get behind. How do I... Okay, we're going to dismiss the squad. It's a rather clumsy way of doing it. And see, that's the thing. I'm not exactly sure this is a better idea. Like, is this really a better way of controlling units than double clicking? I know it gives them boosts and stuff, but it seems like in a way it just could be removed from the game. It's like unnecessary busy work that you're adding to this cycle. And I think that goes for a lot of other stuff, like the asymmetry between civilizations. How important is it that each civilization has different units, for example? Maybe they could just be visually different units, and they don't have to be statistically different. And I think that would make it, you know, entry into the game a lot easier for players who are not familiar with it. If you're going to have a lot of nuance in the game in terms of the differences between civilizations, make sure that it's documented, or make sure that there's a clear difference. Like, why would I choose one civilization over another civilization? Now, here we got some combat. But you should make it clear to me why I should be choosing one civilization over another one. And the game has never made it clear to me, and they have not increased that in this game. They have not improved that at all. I'm actually getting mobbed here. Did not have enough units, and this will demonstrate another interesting part of the game. All my peasants will convert over to the enemy, because you have to have military units around to defend them. Obviously, I have some more military units here. But all the buildings that I built and my units will be converted to the enemy without them ever having to lay a finger on them, just because I did not have any units around to defend them. Obviously, you know, the peasants in this game are probably some of the biggest cowards. They're just typical turncoats and traitors. Something you also have to keep in mind for this game. My musketmen are not going to be able to hold out against these guys. These are pikemen, 17th century, yeah. So the musketmen always try to run away if melee units come after them, like the pikemen. And that's what they're sort of doing right now. But they require, what is it? Iron to shoot? I forget. Like I said, I'm not all that familiar with how to play the game. Probably should show you a ship, because I played part of the very first tutorial. Has a ship in it. You can adjust the difficulty here. Normal, hard, very hard, and impossible, but we're just doing a tutorial here. So we're going to select peace, and there is a mission here that you have to load a ferry, ships. And once again, ships are okay. For the most part, not too well animated. But the biggest problem, in my opinion, with the ships is how they move on the water. Like, why is it that the ship can spin on a dime when you want it to turn around? That's just so disappointing to see that yet. But in conclusion, I would say that Cossacks 3 as a game is playing it very safe, and they're directly targeting the sort of built-in fan base that they have for the game. They're not really taking any risks in trying something new with the series. They're just remaking what worked for them the first time and making it better slightly. Not very significantly, but also adding support, of course, for the game this time around. And they're offering it at a very reasonable price, in my opinion. $20 for a new game nowadays is not very common for any strategy game, because strategy games are sort of known for having a lot of complexity to them. You know, having this many units moving around on the screen is never easy to optimize. You got to deal with building a somewhat competent AI and stuff like that. So if you are like a fan of the original Cossacks, you're probably going to love Cossacks 3. If you're a new player, though, trying to get into Cossacks as a series, Cossacks 3 does not make it any easier for you, in my opinion. Of course, it will be nicer. There are probably some more contemporary conveniences, let's call them. There have been some updates that have made it easier for the player who is not as accustomed to how games in the 1990s worked, for example. Well, Cossacks came out in 2001, but the original Cossacks sort of came out during the golden age of RTS, I guess a lot of people would call it. And this game does not make it easy for players who are unfamiliar with that time to jump in. So either you have to go ahead and learn it all from scratch, because there were no simplifications here. You know, they did not dumb any of the systems down. It's all here again. And that might be an issue for like modern players. I just, it seems to me a lot of players nowadays, they're not interested in games that have quite as much depth as what the games in 2000, the strategy games, real-time strategy games. I should not have built that mill there. I need to build over here. But like strategy games now, they need to be simpler. It seems like, you know, players' attention spans are much shorter. They have a lot more games that they have access to and that they can play. So you got to capture their attention pretty quickly to keep them from moving on to something else. And a lot of real-time strategy games have tried to work that in, and they've kind of failed. So maybe it's just best to go ahead and actually just target the audience that you know will love your game. And it's so far, you know, the reviews on the game have been fairly positive. So a lot of players like the game, and I like the game as well. Said there are a few reservations. But overall, though, that's my opinion of the game. Right here, you can see some of the water. We didn't get to see the water before. Water is animated, which is nice. I have really no complaints about that. It looks okay. You know, not spectacular or anything, but it does the job well enough, especially compared to the trees. Trees were very disappointing. Like, even the buildings have some subtle animations. Why did these trees not have any animations at all? They look like cardboard cutouts that stuck there on the map. It's probably one of my biggest disappointments in regards to the graphics. Like, I can overlook a lot of the other stuff, but really, no, the trees don't move at all. Why does that bother me so much? Just, there's no ambience, lifeless kind of feeling to it. Oh, probably have rambled on far too long with this. You know, if you who's listening to this has made it to this part, let me know what you think of Cossacks 3. I think I'm just being an idiot because I'm a noob to the game and did not fully appreciate the scope and nuance of the game before I started, you know, spouting my opinion on it. Or are you a newcomer to the series? And, you know, if you have started playing the game yet, how did you find it? You know, what did you think of it? Does it make you wish that more of these older real-time strategy series were rebooted a bit and brought up to date? Like, Age of Empires 2 still has a pretty big player base, even of the two-dimensional game, well into, you know, 2016. That's surprising for a game that came out about 16 years before that. It was more like 18 years before that. Yeah. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.